November 12th, 2001.
I heard a crash, a boom, and then there was this sickly silence. It was on fire! It was on fire!
The plane crashed.
Once again, unbearable news.
Oh my God. The first thing that went through my mind is, oh my God.
In a nation on edge.
Are we sure at this point that this is just an accident?
It's horrible to say. We hope that it's just an accident.
Renewed fears of flying.
I don't feel safe at all.
It's unfortunate that this happened this time, when the public is just now trying to get confidence to fly again.
And a grieving New York City.
We will get through this. We're a strong state, a strong city, a strong country, and a strong people.
And tonight, in a stunning development from Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance is pushing the Taliban out of Kabul, the capital, as America fights back.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Chris Bury.
We will bring you up to date on today's crash of that American Airlines jet in New York. But first, the latest from the war in Afghanistan. Taliban forces now appear to be on the run from Kabul, the capital. This after the Northern Alliance and other opposition commanders routed Taliban troops in key northern cities over the last 4 days. Reports say columns of Taliban vehicles were seen deserting Kabul to the south. Northern Alliance troops, after breaking through front lines north of the city, apparently entered without much of a fight. A correspondent for the BBC, William Reeve, is inside Kabul, and he filed this report by telephone a short while ago.
We've just traveled from the west of the city. We stayed in a hotel last night because there was a very loud, a very big bomb landed 2 houses from us yesterday, and all the windows and everything in the house was smashed. We were extremely lucky last night, but we left the area because we were worried that another bomb would land nearby. So we've just come back to the BBC office in the west of the city. We've travelled across the city as far as we can see, asking people, seeing things. Our view is that the Taliban have completely left the Afghan capital, Kabul. We didn't see any of the Northern Alliance soldiers, but others have, and one colleague actually filmed them, and so we've seen film of them. But there are just a few around, and some other journalists have just come to the office, and they've seen a few people, what the Northern Alliance have been calling policemen, I believe. Possible semantics. But otherwise, the city is quite calm. I've seen one dead Taliban on the side of the road just near the office here.
Reporter Sebastian Younger is with Northern Alliance troops still on the outskirts of Kabul, where it is early Tuesday morning. And Sebastian, give us an idea of what you have seen and heard in the last few hours.
Well, Northern Alliance troops poured down the highway last night. Little resistance. We're on the last hilltop outside of Kabul. They're gathered here. I spoke with the top commander, Bismillah Khan, who said that their forces would not enter Kabul. He was very firm about it. Then individual soldiers, maybe individual units who have entered Kabul, and were dealt with apparently very harshly by the Northern Alliance, even beaten up by their own soldiers. We have also spoken with people, civilians who have come out of Kabul just this morning. They said that the Taliban were kicked out of Kabul by a popular uprising last night among the civilians, and that a fight broke out between elements in the Taliban, and they are now all but disappeared from the city.
Sebastian, very quickly, do you have any idea where they are fleeing to?
The reports, again, from the locals are that they have fled to the south of Kabul, which, of course, is on the road to Kandahar, their last stronghold, the spiritual Taliban. If there is a big fight, I expect it will happen there. After they have nowhere else to run.
Sebastian Younger near Kabul, thank you very much. As they fled from Kabul, Taliban forces apparently forced 8 foreign aid workers to go with them. The 8, including 2 Americans, were being held by the Taliban on charges of spreading Christianity in Muslim Afghanistan. When we come back, the crash of American Airlines Flight 587.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Lexus.
Tonight, a GO team from the National Transportation Safety Board is in New York investigating today's crash of American Airlines Flight 587. It went down just after takeoff this morning from Kennedy Airport. The early focus of investigators is on mechanical failure, not terrorism. One of the so-called black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, has already been flown to Washington for examination. Police say 265 bodies have been recovered from the wreckage. Some people on the ground are still missing. And New York City is coping with yet another horrific blow, as we hear from Nightline correspondent Dave Marish.
Many Americans awoke today to what was supposed to be an easy day, Veterans Day. Schools closed, many offices shut. Instead, it was another frightening day for New Yorkers who looked at a trail of smoke on their horizon and wondered what had gone wrong. American Airlines Flight 587, an Airbus 300, was supposed to leave Kennedy Airport at 8 a.m. for Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. It left more than an hour late, taking off at 9:13, crossing Jamaica Bay, and then, 4 minutes after takeoff, disaster. The plane broke up in the air, but the biggest piece, the fuselage, came down in the midst of a residential neighborhood in the New York City borough of Queens. Several on the ground are still missing tonight. Local residents rushed to the scene, some carrying video recorders, others soon helping firefighters carry hoses to burning buildings. This is a neighborhood where many police officers and firefighters live. It was hard hit by the terrorist attack of September 11th, something Mayor Rudy Giuliani remembered as he rushed to the scene.
The first thing that went through my mind is, oh my God, and I just passed a church in which I've been to, I think, 10 funerals.
The 9/11 factor soon defined government reactions to the crash.
The airports have been closed for a while, and I talked to the governor, and just as a precaution, we're going to close the bridges and tunnels for an hour or two.
The news reached the White House within minutes.
This morning, as the president was convening a meeting of his National Security Council to go over the latest developments in the war against terrorism, he received a note handed into the meeting at 9:25 informing him of the crash of an American Airlines flight.
The federal accident investigation apparatus immediately went into high gear.
It is the case that the National Transportation Safety Board is the lead agency because all information we have currently is that this is an accident. But as I say, we are definitely coordinating with the FBI.
One reason the FBI is very much on the case, the plane came apart while still airborne.
At this point, as you know, the wreckage is scattered over a wide area. We have reports from the Coast Guard, in fact, that they have had recovery of some major parts out of Jamaica Bay.
The largest part of the plane's tail was pulled from the bay, and the Coast Guard also found parts of a wing in the water. An engine came down on land, but blocks away from where the fuselage seems to have dropped straight down.
When we went up in the helicopter and saw it, it was amazing how the plane just landed in one small defined area, as opposed to hitting a number of homes. So I don't know what happened, but it could have been far worse.
Not for the families of those on board. Many who had seen the flight off at Kennedy rushed to a care center at a nearby hotel. While in Santo Domingo, pain replaced anticipation among those who were awaiting Flight 587's arrival. Back in Queens, where firefighters had gone house to house in the morning checking for injuries, police spent the afternoon knocking on doors asking what people had seen of the 4-minute flight of the doomed jetliner. Chances are they heard what news crews were told.
I saw an explosion in the sky, and I saw the plane. It looked like one of its wings fell off.
And the whole house shook. And we heard an explosion, and I knew it was American Airlines before the plane even came down, because because we saw the piece come off the plane.
And I felt an impact, and then I saw smoke, and I started screaming in my kitchen. I just couldn't believe my eyes. Here we go again, you know. Oh.
Two thoughts dominate New York City tonight. One is the question behind that last observation. Was this terrorism? Was this, here we go again? The other is simply a sense of loss, personal loss by the survivors of the people on board American Flight 587. Community loss expressed tonight in a vigil in the large Dominican neighborhood of Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan. And among many New Yorkers and Americans, loss of confidence that there are any more easy days, holidays, days without worry and fear in our future. I'm Dave Marish for Nightline in New York.
An accident or an act of terror. The painstaking work of a crash investigation when we come back. Late this evening, the head of the National Transportation Safety Board, Marion Blakey, told reporters that preliminary evidence points strongly toward mechanical failure and not terrorism as the cause of today's American Airlines crash.
At this stage, we believe that all indications are it's an accident.
Joining us here in Washington, Jim Hall, who chaired the National Transportation Safety Board for more than 6 years when it investigated the crashes of TWA 800 and Egypt Air 990. And from Oak Brook, Illinois, ABC News aviation consultant and commercial jet pilot, John Nance. John, earlier we heard the head of the National Transportation Safety Board suggest that everything they know points to an accident as of now. How can they be so confident so early?
I think basically that what the chairman is saying, Chris, is simply that at this point there is no evidence that suggests anything else. And of course it's true that all of us really would like to make sure or would like to see that this is not anything but an accident, even though a very unusual and a totally catastrophic one.
Jim Hall, do you suspect that there is stronger evidence than that? After all day long, officials have been pointing us to the idea that this was not an act of terrorism.
No, I think John's totally correct. I think what the chairman was saying in her comments was basically the information that we currently have. She obviously was not ruling out any possible change in the investigation as a result of additional information.
John, the way the debris was scattered, the wreckage, some of it falling in the bay, the tail section, we saw that engine land in a gas station, we saw the fuselage on another street corner. Does that ring any alarm bells for you?
Well, it does in this way. First of all, it tells us that we've got a very unique sequence. Regardless of what the cause is, aircraft that crash very, very seldom break up in flight. When they do, it's very often a result of high speed, and there was not a high-speed situation as far as we know here. This airplane was on climb-out. It was more than likely doing around 200 to 220 knots. That doesn't give you enough dynamic force in terms of the speed of the wind, so to speak, past the control surfaces, that if you had, for instance, an aircraft engine suddenly go into reverse or a sudden wild control reversal, that you would immediately see the aircraft structure begin to break up. This is a very unique situation. I think we can bank on that statement regardless of whether it was caused by some incendiary device, whether it was caused by an explosion within the engine that was natural to the airplane, so to speak, or whether it was caused by some other anomalous mechanical cause. This is unprecedented, and I believe that's another word that probably applies.
John, take us just very quickly through the various scenarios which could lead to such a breakup.
Well, one of the first things we began to see today when we saw the engine had landed in a separate location was the possibility of a big turbofan engine like this seizing and twisting off of its mountings, because that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to break away before it can do any serious damage to the wing. And yet we then began to get indications that there was a portion of the wing in the water at a different location. Now we know that both engines landed separately from the fuselage, and we have a piece of the tail the vertical stabilizer, which looks like it was simply detached and came off a factory floor, apparently undamaged, that went into the water. It's very difficult to construct a scenario that would account for all this unless you begin to think of an engine actually ripping loose from the wing and from its mountings and possibly coming back over the top of the wing and hitting a portion of the rear of the fuselage. And that's wild speculation too. But something caused the vertical stabilizer to depart from the airplane, and that's not an effect that you're going to get from only 2,800 feet at only around 220 knots with any other sort of happenstance. In other words, you just don't have enough speed there to be able to blow the fuselage apart if it starts going in one direction or another.
Jim Hall,
I don't know how to explain it.
Jim Hall, one of the things that John just mentioned was the engine dropping off separate from the rest of the plane. One of the things that we saw today in those pictures of the engine was a hole sort of right in the middle. Does that tell you anything, given the experience of either this airplane, the Airbus 300, or the GE engine?
Well, of course, during my tenure at the board, there were 6 different recommendations that were made in regard to the CF6 engine that came out of accidents or incidents where that engine was involved. So I think one of the things the investigators are going to be looking at, obviously, is the maintenance history and as many records as we can get together in terms of this particular engine. I think John is right on in his comments. This is a very unusual breakup, and I think right now we need not to make too much out of things we've visually seen without having all the information to look at.
John Nance, we just have a little bit of time left. The plane was only airborne for a little under 3 minutes. Investigators have now recovered the cockpit voice recorder. In that time of just under 3 minutes, is there enough information to give the investigators good quality data from that recorder?
Well, there probably is, but it's much too soon to say. But by using both the flight data recorder and the voice recorder together, with the flight dynamics being put together as a result, there'll be probably every ability of the board to be able to come to a really solid conclusion. And I've got to echo what Chairman Hall said. We really, the mantra of the board has always been rule nothing in, rule nothing out. And boy, that is absolutely dead on right at this particular stage. We just don't know.
John Nance, Jim Hall, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. When word first broke of another plane disaster in New York, what was on many minds but rarely spoken, that when we come back. For a nation still very much on edge, today's American Airlines crash tore at frayed nerves from Wall Street to Main Street. But as the story unfolded, the country seemed to experience something that would have been unthinkable before September 11th. Here's Nightline's John Donvan.
When a plane goes down and more than 200 people are killed, our duty as fellow humans is to mourn for those people, first and last. And yet, didn't at least some of us let a different thought cross our minds today? That we would feel better if we could be told this was an accident, just an accident, not terrorism, which means we'd have to keep on worrying. Compared to terrorism, the accident theory comes as a relief. Not that anyone said this unsayable thing out loud today, but it was clear when they reopened New York's bridges and tunnels after several hours this afternoon that it was like an all-clear signal on terrorism, and that was a relief. It was also clear that authorities, while obliged to investigate the possibility of terrorism, know that the public will be reassured to hear the alternative explanation.
All information we have currently is that this is an accident.
First information is always subject to change. We have not ruled anything in, not ruled anything out.
And across the country, Chicago's O'Hare Airport, for example, passengers needed that bit of faith in the accident theory to talk themselves into flying again.
I don't think that it has anything to do with anything except an accident in my heart, but what am I going to do about it? I still have to go.
I think that if there were something to be fearful of, the airport would probably be closed.
I'm going to be flying today because I trust that everything is okay.
Normally, in the world before September 11th, that trust would be shattered by a devastating plane crash such as New York saw today. Normally, crashes scare people down to their bones, accident or not. A plane drops an engine, for example, passengers get killed, and people conclude, not quite rationally, but certainly understandably, that flying has suddenly become unsafe. Ridership always falls dramatically for a while. But we were already in one of those phases. Ridership fell way off after September 11th and was only slowly recovering, and then today happened. This was the chairman of American Airlines this morning.
As you would imagine, today's news comes at a difficult time for the nation, a difficult time for the airline industry, and a very difficult time for American Airlines.
And it will only get worse if, after today, still more Americans get scared away from flying just as the Thanksgiving travel season approaches. Of course, it might help if Congress can complete its work on an aviation security bill, which is stuck on the issue of whether security screeners should be federal employees. Meanwhile, more talk of the economic impact. The price of oil dropped today over fear that airlines with fewer passengers would buy less jet fuel. The stock market slipped almost 200 points in the minutes after the crash, but regained most of that later. But look at what's going on here. All of this discussion today, the day of the crash, about ridership patterns and the price of oil and aviation bills. The bodies are still being recovered, and yet people were talking about these after effects as if the significance of Flight 587 is its impact on the economy or on passenger confidence in the safety of flying. Flight 587 was a human catastrophe in itself, not a footnote to September 11th. That it may have been just an accident is no relief to those who lost a loved one when 587 crashed after takeoff. I'm John Donvan for Nightline in Washington.
That's our report for tonight. I'm Chris Bury in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.